My daughter-in-law kicked me out of my own house on a Tuesday morning. That's how it started. Not with a big scene, not with lawyers or police, just her standing in my kitchen. My kitchen, the one I'd remodeled in 1987 with money I'd saved from 3 years of overtime at the plant, telling me I needed to find somewhere else to stay for a while. I remember I was holding a coffee mug, the one with the faded Michigan State logo my late wife Joanne had given me the Christmas before she passed. I just stood there looking at my daughter-in-law, this woman named Gretchen, and I thought, she has absolutely no idea what she just set in motion. But I didn't say a word. I finished my coffee, set the mug in the sink, and walked upstairs to pack a bag. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the history. My name is Leonard. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working quality control at an auto parts manufacturer outside of Lansing. I'm not a wealthy man, but I'm not poor either. I own my home outright, paid off the mortgage 11 years ago. I have a pension, a modest 401k, and a savings account that I've been careful with my entire life. Joanne and I lived simply. We didn't take fancy vacations. We drove our cars until the wheels nearly fell off. We believed in doing things the right way, even when the right way was the harder way. Our son, my boy Elliot, is 34. I raised him alone for the last 12 years of his childhood after Joanne got sick. I went to every baseball game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. I worked double shifts so he could go to Michigan State without debt. I co-signed his first car loan. When he needed $8,000 to cover a gap in his business plan 6 years ago, a landscaping company he was trying to get off the ground, I wrote him a check without a single question asked. I loved my son. I still do. Gretchen came into his life about 4 years ago. She's 31. She waitresses at a brewpub downtown, or she did. I'm not sure she's still there. She's not a bad person exactly. She's ambitious in a way that doesn't match her circumstances, which I've come to understand can make people do desperate things. She wanted a bigger house, a nicer car, vacations she'd seen on Instagram. And my son, who has always wanted to make the people around him happy, kept trying to give her those things even when he couldn't really afford them. I watched it happen slowly. The landscaping business never quite took off the way Elliot had hoped. He had steady work but not growing work, if you understand what I mean. He was comfortable, not thriving. And Gretchen was not a comfortable kind of person. About 2 years ago, Elliot started coming to me more often for help. Small things at first. $200 here, $500 there. I helped because he's my son, and that's what fathers do. But then the amounts got bigger. In the span of 18 months, I lent him, and by extension Gretchen, because I'm not naive about where it was going, just under $23,000. No paperwork, no payment schedule. Just a father trusting his son. The last time he asked, I said no. He needed $6,500. Something about a new mowing rig for the business. I told him I couldn't do it right now, that I had my own expenses, that I was trying to protect my retirement, all of which was true. He didn't argue, he just nodded and said he understood. Gretchen didn't take it the same way. It was a Sunday. Elliot was out doing an estimate across town. Gretchen and I were in the kitchen. Again, my kitchen, because she and Elliot had been living with me rent-free for 7 months at that point, which was supposed to be temporary, while they saved for a down payment on their own place. She brought it up herself. Said Elliot had told her I refused to help with the equipment loan. I said that was correct. She said she thought that was unfair given everything they'd been through. I asked her what. Specifically, I owed them given that I'd already given them $23,000 with no repayment. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. Then she said it, "You know, Leonard, this is going to be your house someday anyway. You're basically just giving it to us early." I set down the dish towel I was holding. "Excuse me," I said. "When you're gone," she said like she was discussing the weather. "All of this comes to Elliot anyway. The house, whatever's in your accounts, you're not exactly going to live forever. I want to be very careful here about what happened next, because I've thought about it every day since." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say anything I regret. I told her calmly that she had no idea what was or wasn't in my will, that it was none of her business, and that I'd appreciate it if she kept my mortality out of conversations about home improvement loans. She left the room. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, on that Tuesday morning I mentioned, she walked into the kitchen while I was making breakfast and told me, very matter-of-factly, that it might be better for everyone if I found a place of my own. You could get an apartment, she said, something small, a one-bedroom. It would probably be good for your independence. She said it like she was suggesting I try a new restaurant. I asked her if Elliot knew she was saying this. She said they'd talked about it. I finished my coffee, put the mug in the sink, and went upstairs to pack a bag. I want to be honest about something, I cried in the car. I sat in my driveway in my 2019 Ford F-150 for about 10 minutes and I cried. Not from sadness exactly. More from the particular shame of being made to feel like a guest in your own home, like you've become inconvenient. Like 63 years of working and saving and doing the right thing somehow added up to this moment. Sitting in your own driveway, bag in the back seat, feeling like you just got evicted from your own life. Then I wiped my face, backed out of the driveway, and drove to see my attorney. My attorney's name is Sylvia Park. She's been handling my affairs for about 8 years. Estate planning, a minor dispute with a contractor a few years back, nothing dramatic. She's sharp, no nonsense, and she has absolutely no patience for foolishness. I called her from the parking lot of a Meisher on the way out of my neighborhood and told her I needed to come in. She saw me that afternoon. I explained everything. The loans, the conversations, the Tuesday morning. She listened without interrupting, which I've always appreciated about her. When I finished, she asked me 2 questions. First, is your name the only name on the deed? Yes. Second, do you have any of the loans documented? No. She nodded slowly. Then she said, Leonard, I want you to understand something. You have more leverage here than you realize, but I need you to do exactly what I tell you, and I need you to do it quietly. I told her I was listening. What Sylvia explained to me over the next 2 weeks changed everything. First, as the sole owner of my home, I had every right to ask Elliot and Gretchen to leave, with proper legal notice. In Michigan, even family members who've been living somewhere for more than 30 days are considered tenants under the law and require formal notice. Sylvia prepared a notice to vacate 30 days, completely legal, completely airtight. Second, the $23,000. Without written documentation, it was going to be difficult to recover in court. But Sylvia said the more important thing was the estate piece. She recommended we immediately update my will and all relevant documents. She had a colleague, an estate attorney named Douglas, who could see me within the week. Third, and this is the part that required my patience, my home security system. I'd had a Ring system installed about 3 years earlier. 4 cameras, front door, back door, garage, and one in the living room that Joanne had originally wanted because she was nervous about being alone when I traveled. I'd forgotten about that last one, honestly. It just sat there above the fireplace mantel like part of the furniture. Sylvia asked me if the cameras had been recording. I said yes. Cloud storage. 30 days rolling. She asked me to check the footage from the Sunday of my conversation with Gretchen in the kitchen. The kitchen camera didn't capture it. Wrong room. But the living room camera had audio pickup that extended further than I'd realized because the kitchen is open to the living room in my floor plan. You could hear it. Not perfectly, but clearly enough. You could hear Gretchen say, when you're gone, all of this comes to Elliot anyway. You're not exactly going to live forever. Sylvia listened to it twice. Then she said, save everything, don't tell anyone, and don't do anything else until I say. I stayed with my friend Eugene those first 2 weeks. Eugene and I grew up on the same block in Lansing, went to the same high school, stayed close through all the years. He's widowed too. Lost his wife Carol 3 years ago, and he's got a spare bedroom. He didn't ask too many questions. He just set the room up and made sure there was coffee in the morning. That's the kind of friend he is. I didn't call Elliot right away. I needed to think and I needed to be calm when we talked, not raw. I sent him a text that just said I was staying with Eugene for a bit and that I hoped he was okay. He texted back, Dad, I'm really sorry. Can we talk? I said yes, soon. I meant it, but I needed to have certain things in order first. Sylvia filed the notice to vacate. Elliot called me within an hour of receiving it. He was upset, genuinely I think. He said Gretchen hadn't meant it that way, that it was just a suggestion, that they had nowhere to go on 30 days' notice. I told him I understood it was hard. I told him I loved him. I told him I needed my home back. He said, "Dad, she's my wife." I said, "I know, and I'm your father." There was a long pause on the line. He said he needed some time. I said, "Okay." Meanwhile, I met with Douglas, the estate attorney. We spent 2 sessions going through everything. My will, which hadn't been updated since 2019, left the bulk of my estate to Elliot. The house, the savings, the 401k, everything. Standard. What I'd always intended. Douglas and I restructured it entirely. The house would not pass directly to Elliot. Instead, it would go into a trust with specific conditions. The savings account I had roughly $94,000 set aside would be divided. $40,000 to my sister Paulette's kids, my niece and nephew who I'm close to, $30,000 to the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation in Joanne's name, and the remaining $24,000 to Elliot, with a notation that it represented approximately the amount I had lent him over the previous 18 months, now formalized as his inheritance advance. The trust conditions for the house were detailed. Elliot could inherit the property only if he was not in a marriage that had been dissolved by divorce within 3 years of my passing, a clause Douglas said was legally enforceable under certain structures. It wasn't punitive toward Elliot. It was protective. I wanted to make sure the home Joanne and I built didn't get split up in a divorce settlement. I signed everything on a Thursday afternoon in Douglas's office. Sylvia was there too. It was very quiet, very still. I thought about Joanne. But 3 weeks after the notice to vacate, something shifted with Elliot. He started calling more. Not about the house, just to talk. He mentioned carefully that Gretchen had been really stressed. He mentioned that things at home had been tense. He mentioned in a way that told me more than he probably intended, that she had been making a lot of decisions without really talking to him. I didn't push. I just listened. That's what Sylvia had told me to do. On a Saturday evening, Elliot showed up at Eugene's house alone. No call ahead, just knocked on the door. Eugene let him in and quietly disappeared into the back of the house, which I appreciated. My son sat across from me at Eugene's kitchen table. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been trying very hard to hold two incompatible things together and was starting to understand they didn't fit. He said, "Dad, did she ask you to leave your own house?" I said yes. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I didn't know she was going to do that. I want you to know that. She told me she'd talk to you and you'd agreed it might be a good idea temporarily. I didn't question it and I should have." I told him I appreciated him saying that. Then I played him the audio from the camera. Just the relevant portion. Just Gretchen's voice. "When you're gone, all of this comes to Elliot anyway. You're not exactly going to live forever." He didn't say anything for a long time after that. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet, though he didn't cry. He just stared at the table. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said I knew. The 30-day notice period ended. Elliot and Gretchen moved out, into a rental in a complex on the east side of town. Elliot moved quickly once he'd made up his mind. Gretchen apparently had a lot to say about it that he chose not to relay to me in detail, which I respected. I moved back into my home on a Friday morning. I walked through every room, checked the Ring cameras, all intact, made sure the living room one was still positioned correctly above the mantel, set Joanne's mug back on the shelf next to the coffee maker where it belonged. That afternoon, Sylvia called. She said, "How does it feel?" I said it felt like coming home. She said, "Good. Now there's one more thing we need to talk about." The $23,000 was the last piece of this. Without documentation, a civil suit was a long shot, Sylvia told me honestly. But she had found something. 3 of the transfers, totaling $11,200, had been made by Zelle, from my account to Elliot's account, with memo lines I typed myself. 2 said loan, and 1 said loan repayment advance. Sylvia said those memos, combined with the dollar amounts and the pattern of transfers, were enough to establish the intent of a loan rather than a gift. She filed a small claims action for the $11,200. The maximum for small claims in Michigan at the time was $7,000, but Sylvia filed it in district court to capture the full amount. I want to be honest, I didn't file it because I needed the money. I filed it because it was the truth. Money I'd worked for, lent in good faith, needed to be acknowledged as what it was. Elliot didn't contest it. He called me the night before the hearing date and said he wanted to settle. He said he could do $500 a month. I said that was fine. We didn't need a judge. He's been paying it for 5 months now. Every first of the month, $500 shows up in my account from his Zelle. We've had dinner twice since all of this, just the two of us. He's doing better without the financial pressure of trying to keep up with expectations that were never really his to begin with. He seems lighter. He seems like my son again. I haven't spoken to Gretchen since the morning she told me to find a one-bedroom apartment. I don't carry anger about her. I understand now that she looked at my house and saw a shortcut, and when the shortcut didn't materialize the way she expected, she panicked. That's a human thing to do. It doesn't make it right, but it makes it comprehensible. What she didn't know, what I didn't fully understand myself until I sat in Sylvia's office that first afternoon, was that the situation she thought she was controlling had already started changing the moment she walked into my kitchen and told me I wasn't going to live forever. She thought she was managing a timeline. She thought she was being practical about something inevitable. What she didn't account for was that the man she was talking to had spent 63 years learning the difference between patience and weakness. I waited. I documented. I signed the papers quietly and correctly. I didn't make threats. I didn't cause scenes. I made phone calls and kept appointments and let the process do what it was designed to do. When Elliot and Gretchen picked up the last of their boxes, Gretchen came back inside for something she'd left. A jacket or a bag, I don't remember. She passed through the living room. She paused for just a moment near the fireplace, and I saw her eyes go to the camera on the mantel. Just for a second. She walked out without saying anything. I think she figured it out then. I think she understood what that camera had been and what it had captured, and why the morning she tried to nudge an old man out of his own home had not gone the way she planned. I poured myself a cup of coffee in Joanne's mug and sat down at my kitchen table. 63 years old, house paid off, papers signed, son on his way back to me. Some things work out right if you're patient enough to let them. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not to replay it with bitterness, I'm past that, but to actually understand it. Because if I'm honest, the whole thing taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. There's a version of me that reacts the morning Gretchen tells me to find a one-bedroom apartment. That version of me raises his voice, says things he can't take back, maybe even throws them out of the house that same day in a fury that feels righteous in the moment and costs him everything afterward. I've known men who've done exactly that. I understand the impulse. When someone insults your dignity inside your own home, the home you paid for, the home where you raised your child, the home where your wife took her last breath, the body wants to react before the mind can catch up. But I've learned at 63 that the people who act on that impulse are almost never the ones who come out whole on the other side. What Gretchen didn't understand about me, what I didn't fully understand about myself until I sat across from Sylvia that first afternoon, is that patience isn't the same thing as weakness, not even close. Patience is what you do when you're smart enough to know that the situation will eventually require proof, not anger. That a judge doesn't care how betrayed you felt, that a signed document outlasts a shouting match every single time. I think about Elliot a lot when I reflect on all of this. My son is a good man who got pulled in a direction that wasn't really his. That happens. People who love someone sometimes absorb that person's ambitions as if they were their own, and then spend years exhausted by the weight of something they never actually wanted. I watched Elliot carrying that for a long time, and I didn't say enough about it. That's on me. There are things a father can see from the outside that a son can't see from the inside, and I waited too long to say them plainly. I won't make that mistake again. What I keep coming back to is this. Every consequence Gretchen experienced came directly from choices she made. No one set a trap for her. I didn't scheme or manipulate. I went to my attorney, updated my documents, followed the law, and let the camera footage speak for itself. The recording existed because Joanne had wanted to feel safe in her own home years before any of this happened. That's all. There was no plan. There was only the truth sitting on a hard drive waiting patiently to be relevant. That's how it usually works in my experience. The truth doesn't expire. It just waits. I think the hardest thing, and the most important thing, is learning to act with your head when your heart is screaming at you to do something dramatic, Not because your feelings are wrong. Mine weren't wrong. I was furious and hurt and genuinely ashamed in a way I hadn't felt since I was a young man. But feelings are not a strategy. Dignity is a strategy. Documentation is a strategy. Calling the right people and trusting the right process. That's a strategy. Joanne used to say that the strongest thing a person can do is nothing, when nothing is exactly what the moment calls for. I didn't fully understand that when she said it. I do now. I finished my coffee. I signed my papers. I came home. That's the whole story. And I think it's enough.